Hello Year 9, I hope you're all okay. It's Mrs. Kettle here and I'm going to be taking you through your work for the next 5 weeks. So we're going to be looking at the poetry strand. Now I know that some of you may have looked at a couple of poems already with the remote learning before half term. Please don't worry if you haven't, because we'll be looking at those poems in lessons 9 and 10 and just recapping those so that you are familiar with them. So for today, you will just need the fact book, week 1, lesson 1 in front of you. You'll need a copy of the poem Death of a Naturalist that we have also sent you. And it would be a really good idea if you had a highlighter, a pen or a pencil and a separate piece of paper so that you can make notes as we go through this lesson. So, what I want you to do just for the first 5 or 10 minutes is to read the poem to yourself now. But if you find this a little bit difficult and you'd rather listen to an audible version, then I've put a link on the screen now that you can either click or search on YouTube, and you can actually listen to Seamus Heaney, the poet, reading this poem out to you. So whichever one you'd prefer, just take a couple of minutes to do that for me. Okay, so now that you have read this poem, you should start to have an understanding of what it's about. So, you should understand that at first the speaker is thrilled by this slimy frog spawn that eventually becomes tadpoles and then frogs. But as the bigger picture becomes clearer, towards the end of the poem he becomes repulsed by it. Okay, this is a memory for the speaker. The key message here is because of what he experiences and learns, his opinions and feelings completely change, and this is all part of his growing up and becoming older and wiser. Now we're going to go through the poem in more detail, so if you are struggling and you're still a little bit unsure, then hopefully it will become a little bit clearer as we go through this lesson. So, the one big question that we might ask ourselves, and if we were in class we might have a discussion about why this is important, but when you think about it, our world and our lives are constantly undergoing change. Some of these changes are really big, while others aren't so big, but our knowledge is always growing and our opinions and preferences are always changing. So I know that when I've looked back at family photos, I've wondered why I was wearing such a hideous jumper, or what I was thinking having a haircut like I did. But as I said before, it's all about us growing up and our opinions changing. So the title then, Death of a Naturalist. Now the word naturalist applies directly to the meaning of the poem. We know that this word is someone who's an expert in natural things. So the speaker in this poem seems to be a budding naturalist who has a keen interest in this flax dam and the frogs. But his interest dies at the end of the poem when he sees the horrifying scene of the frogs slapping around in a threatening and disgusting way. Now remember, it's about his experience with nature as a boy, and it's a metaphor for the loss of his childhood innocence, because as he looks back at his youth, he looks back and he realises his youthful naivety. Okay, so at the end of the day, the title alerts us to a profound change. Okay, however you want to interpret the depth of the title, we know that the poem's all about growing older and what gets left behind in the process. Okay, so when we look at the structure of this poem then, if you have a look in front of you, you can see that it's written in 2 stanzas. Now in stanza 1, he's full of enthusiasm and he enjoys nature. It seems really positive, really adventurous and full of wonder. But then in stanza 2, this changes because he becomes more aware of the dangers of the world around him. It's really negative in comparison to the first stanza. And this one seems full of disgust, and there's this sense of fear from the narrator as well. Now with regard to form, it's first person and it's this narrator who's reflecting on their childhood. It's a first-person monologue, which makes it believable in this personal account. And it's written in blank verse. That means that it's unrhymed. It makes the poem have a more conversational tone, and it's simply as if the narrator's telling us a simple story, okay, a story that he remembers from his childhood. Now, Seamus Heaney, the poet, he was born in Northern Ireland. He was the eldest child in a family of 9 children. His father was a farmer and cattle dealer, and much of his poetry is centred on the countryside and farm life that he knew as a boy. And he often wrote about the loss of innocence in his poetry as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Now, what I want you to do, based on what you've read and based on what we have just discussed, I would like you to answer the 5 questions that are on your screen now. You can use the fact sheet that you've got, or you can simply use your memory of what you remember me talking about. But question 1, in a couple of sentences, sum up the story or narrative of the poem. Number 2, tell me why there's 2 stanzas, and tell me if there's any differences in tone between them. Question 3, list words or phrases from the first stanza that make the natural world sound beautiful. 4, list words or phrases from the second stanza which makes nature sound unappealing. And 5, explain how the title reflects the theme of the poem. So give yourself 5 or 10 minutes. There's no time limit. Just pause the presentation and then click play when you have finished. So the answers, I haven't put an answer for question 1 because I simply want you to sum up what you think the story or the narrative is about in your own words. We know for question 2 that it's divided into 2 stanzas because it shows his change in attitude from positive to negative. Okay, remember our views change on many things as we grow older. Question 3, list words or phrases from the first stanza that make the natural world sound beautiful. So you could have had words like green, delicately, blue bottles, dragonflies, spotted butterflies, shade of the banks, if you can see that one on your screen. Now, please remember that although this imagery in the first stanza is still really unappealing, it's his opinion of it that matters because he finds nature fascinating as a child. Question 4 then, the unappealing words from the second stanza, you could have had rank, cow dung, coarse croaking, air was thick, gross-bellied frogs, or slap and plop. And then question 5, explain how the title reflects the theme of the poem. Remember, it's all about the death of his innocence. As you get older, this is something that is lost. So what we're going to do now then is we're going to annotate this poem together. So you'll see on your screen now that you have got some sentences that are in red, some words or sentences. So if you could highlight those on your copy of the poem, and then we will go through and add the annotations. So to start with then, all year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland, green and heavy-headed, flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. So flax is a type of plant, and when it's got this word festered with it, it suggests that it's decaying, it's rotting. You've got the punishing sun. The sun is being personified, suggesting that it's harsh. You've then got this oxymoron, bubbles gargled delicately, showing his appreciation for the disgusting scene. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water. Okay, but best of all, this emphasises his youthful fascination. There were beautiful butterflies and there was dragonflies that he could look at, but best of all, he was interested in the slobber of frog spawn. And when you've got these 2 words, slobber, and then a little further down you've got jam potfuls just here, both of these words suggest that the speaker is young. And then you've got the first person voice, okay, the I, showing that he's reminiscing on his childhood. And you've got these verbs here, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst, showing he's excited. Okay, he's being impatient. He can't wait to see what happens next. And then you've got the fact that Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in the rain. So the fact that he says Miss Walls would tell us shows that he's really enthusiastic about the lesson and wants to learn. Here you've got mammy, which is Irish dialect, and then you've got these facts at the bottom showing that he was eager to share what he'd found out. Then we move on to the second stanza. Then, one hot day when fields were rank. Okay, the word then shows the change in his tone and his viewpoint. And then it talks about the frogs being angry and invaded the flax dam, showing that they're now threatening and he's more aware of the dangers. You've got this coarse croaking, okay, enhancing the sound that he can now hear. Then it talks about their loose necks pulsed like sails, exaggerating their movement and the fact that now he doesn't like it. This onomatopoeia of slap and plop reinforces their slimy nature. And the fact here, this short sentence, I sickened, turned and ran, okay, this list of verbs is a direct contrast to his earlier enthusiasm. He can't wait to get away because he's so disgusted by this scene. Okay, remember he was interested in the frogs and the frog spawn, but now all of a sudden the language is of fear and repulsion. Okay, he feels threatened. He calls them the great slime kings, showing that now the frogs hold all the power and he's not wanted there. And this final line, that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. This verb clutch shows he's now scared of the frogs. And remember, this is a metaphor for his loss of innocence. Okay, these final words shows the contrast with when he would collect the jellied specks, but he's now grown up and no longer wants to play the games of his childhood. So hopefully you've got some more understanding of what this poem's about, and you've been able to annotate and make notes just like I have on the screen. If you need to go back, that's absolutely fine. You can do that in your own time, so take as long as you need. What I'd like you to do then, for the last part of this lesson, there's 2 questions on your fact sheet in front of you. One of them is the poem uses lots of military language. Can you spot at least 2 examples? So tell me who is at war and why. And then question 2, are there any words that sound fairly childlike? What are they and why have they been used? So I'd like you to spend some time now answering those questions, and then for your second lesson we will go through those answers just to make sure that you've got the correct answer ready for when you come to revise this poem in year 10 and 11. So that's all from me today, and I will be back with lesson number 2. Take care, year 9. Goodbye.